Session 2. Very nice graphics. All right. Why is atheism rising? I have listed some factors here. There are many factors, none of which are certain. However, these are the primary ones. Okay, not one of them, we haven't really determined the exact reason, like which one is the predominant reason. However, we have found a few. Number one, disappointment with religious authorities and state practice. That is probably one of the most influential reasons. Okay? And I'm talking about places like Saudi Arabia. Now, some people like Saudi Arabia. I've even heard many Muslims in Malaysia speak very highly of the place. And I don't wish to disregard your opinion. However, the people living in Saudi Arabia may have a different view. There are a lot of complaints within the population about how it's run. And it's not because it's not secular enough. It's because a lot of Muslims, especially within Medina, because there's always been a historical conflict between the two, even though they're both Muslim now. Mecca and Medina are still in conflict. There's actually a group in Medina, okay, as an example, who follow what you would consider to say, you could call it Sufism. There's a lot of Sufis in Medina, okay? And I don't mean Sufis as in the liberal types that we understand many people to discuss. I'm talking about the traditional practitioners of tasawwuf. Okay, and then on the other side, in Mecca, you're starting to have what we call, they're not Salafiyah, they're more like Neo-Salafiyah. Now they've kind of changed a little bit as well. We can maybe get into that discussion more later in regards to what their beliefs and practices are, but there's always been a political unrest between the two. And most of the complaints are coming from Medina. Okay, now whether you agree with Medina or Mecca, that's entirely, but I'm just telling you that there are issues there. All right, and even places like, especially Pakistan, which is probably the most unstable Muslim country today. Well, no, Libya now, if we consider that. Okay, so number two, inferiority complex in the face of Western societies and cultures. This is usually one of the more predominant reasons that we find, is that a lot of Muslims looking up to Western societies, they see the advancements in technology and science, and they wonder, why don't we have that? Okay, and I'm going to get into how these are significant in a second. A lack of proper arguments for God's existence and the rationality of religion from scholars. This is one of the big reasons as well. Major reasons. As I told you earlier, many scholars are still using traditional argumentation. They haven't really gone up to times now with how atheists are thinking. For instance, most of the scholars, and I'm saying this not out of arrogance, I'm saying this out of knowledge. Okay, so I want to humble myself. These scholars deserve a lot of respect. They deserve your humility, okay? And they should never be talked down to in any respect whatsoever. However, it is okay to say that some scholars just don't know things. Okay, so when I'm talking about the scholars, I respect them for their Arabic, which is profoundly better than my own. Probably many people in here are better than me in Arabic. I respect them for their fiqh and things like this. But in terms of philosophy, in terms of different ideologies on the planet now, many of our scholars are behind. And this may be due to the educational system like Al-Azhar or Medina University have not really caught up in that respect. And speaking of Al-Azhar, I don't know what's going on with there now. After Sisi took over, I mean, Al-Azhar I think has been just completely fallen apart. So I'm not surprised that they haven't come up with anything. Anyway, so why do apostates choose atheism over Christianity, Judaism, etc.? This is probably the big question that you're asking in your minds right now. Why is everyone deconverting? If they're deconverting, why are they going to atheism, not to other religions, right? There's so many choices. So why are most of them going to atheism? Okay, well, when people leave a religion, they often choose one that is drastically different or opposed to their previous faith, all right? Since Christianity, Judaism, and other religions have succumbed to the political power of the secular state, meaning they become entirely secularized and submissive, meaning Christianity and Judaism have become no more than hobbies for most people in Western Europe and America, okay? And since their followers are largely secular in lifestyle, often choosing humanistic values over religious ones, there is little difference between these so-called religious observers and atheists. When you see a Christian on the street, you see an atheist on the street, they're probably acting very similar. That's just especially in Western Europe and the United States. This is normal. Now, of course, you have your fundamentalists, but they're usually the minorities. Okay, the majority of people typically have the same lifestyles. And I'm not saying, for those of you in here who may practice these things or may not be Muslim, I don't know. Most of you in here are Muslim, I believe, or all of you, alhamdulillah. But in any case, if some of you who are not, so when I mention these things, please don't take offense. It's just against our faith. So when I say like drinking or fornication or things like this, these are usual practices among many Christians and Jews. Okay? So they act no different than many atheists do, who consider this normal. Okay? So in that respect, when somebody is deconverting from one religion, why would they want to go to another one when there's really no difference between them and the atheists? They can go all the way, right? As such, apostates are more often than not attracted to those ideas which promote secularization most intensely as opposed to religious dogma. Since Islam is the only religion today that has yet to fully submit to secularism, its most extreme opponent, atheism, is seen as the best alternative. Does that make sense?
You haven't explained what is secularism exactly.
Secularism is, what I'm talking about here is, okay, first off, the definition of secularism is the division between church and state, or division between religion and state. Okay, so religion does not hold any governing power over the people. All right, so in terms of Islam, for instance, we don't apply hudud in Malaysia at all. Right, it doesn't happen. I mean, right, you go to a civil court. If you do something wrong and you get punished, go to jail. Maybe you get caned for something, right? But in terms of cutting the hand off, stoning, things like this, it doesn't happen. Okay? So in fact, our religion is not being practiced at the government level at all. There are banks everywhere in Malaysia practicing riba. So that can't be possible, right? So what I mean by secularization is the division between religion and state, and the state works on predominantly humanistic values and promotes humanistic values above everything else. Your decisions of government, whenever you choose a government, whenever you choose people to go into power, must be based on those same values. If you refer to the Quran or the Bible, people are going to think you're unreasonable in your approach whenever you go. Now, some people, of course, will use religion in politics, but when they get into power, they still act like, you know, I know I should stay away from politics. You told me to do that, but because I get really bad when I talk about politics. Everybody's like, oh, no. You know, so he's starting to talk again. That's bad. So, but I'm not going to mention names. So, but certain people in power here act no different than Obama, act no different than, what's his name in Russia? Putin, you know, they're no different. They're absolutely zero difference. They wear nice Western suits. I can wear one because I'm from the West. So, you know, so I got you there. So no, so they wear, you know, their nice little suits. You know, they shave their faces completely. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but they do it to appease, right, Western powers. And they want to govern purely by civil law. Purely by civil law. When Kelantan was trying to implement Sharia, what happened? Federal government knocked it down like this, even though like 99% of the population wanted it. That's very strange, right? You would think if it's a democracy, they would allow them, right? No. Okay, I'm done with politics, I'm sorry. Okay, great. Okay, so next. If I keep talking, I'll get worse. Then the police will come in and be like, okay, come on. So, okay, the biggest attraction to atheism, why is this the case? The scientific enterprise. Please? What? The scientific enterprise is the most attractive feature of atheistic ideology and secularization in general. Advancements in technology, advancements in health, economic growth. The worldly benefits of scientific and technological output allows people to feel a sense of power, control, and superiority over those who lack such things. Okay? If you look at the UN, for instance, their main indication of human progress, their main indication of human well-being across the globe are these features. Even happiness. Who knows what the happiest country in the world is? Sweden. Do you know Sweden has the 4th highest rate of taking antidepressants?
Taking?
Antidepressants. You know that? Interesting.
What was Sweden?
Whoa, what happened there? Why are they the happiest country in the world then? That's strange. Do you know they only work 28 hours a week?
That's a lot.
That's little. They're also one of the least productive countries in the world. Do you know that 1 in 3 men in Sweden, or no, is it 1 in 3? I'm sorry, excuse me for the statistic. It might be 1 in 10 at most. 1 in 3 at most, 1 in 10 at least. In Sweden have had sex with an animal.
1 in 10.
Yeah, or 1 in 3. I think it's 1, I'm gonna be nice, 1 in 10. Okay? 1 in 10 have had sex with an animal. Now, if you're not against that, I mean, but I don't know. It would seem to me that people who have these sort of drug addictions also very high in Sweden. Alcoholism is very high in Sweden.
Okay, let's go to Spain then.
Spain is horrible. I don't want to get into that. Spain is just horrendous. Spain has one of the worst economies in the world right now. I wouldn't go there, you know. I have ancestors there. I wouldn't still go there. Okay, so scientific progress, technology, and health, these are things that attract us. When people have these things, they feel a sense of superiority. They say, you see a lot of Americans, they're like, you know, I'm American. I don't know if you've met these sort of Americans, obnoxious types. They come, you know, we have the greatest military in the world. We could bomb you if we wanted to, you know, things that, you know, the people actually talk like this. But what about this? What about science, or not science, but people with science creating so much pollution? We have a global warming issue now. What about weapons of mass destruction? I talked about Nagasaki and Hiroshima. What about the bombs that were dropped recently in Iraq? Or if we know about Fallujah, anybody understand what happened in Fallujah? Uranium-tipped bullets. Economic exploitation. We still have child labor. Even in Malaysia you have child labor. You go to Bukit Bintang, you can see child labor. I'm not kidding. You know those kids that come up to you with the Yasin? You don't think somebody owns them?
I don't think they are Malaysians.
They're not Malaysians, but they're here. No, it's a. Why is everyone laughing? I don't understand. It's a point, right? It's a point. Why are they here? But they're here. They're still here. It's still a Malaysian problem, even though they're from somewhere else. I mean, yeah, you can ship them over back where they came from, but I mean, you're not solving anything. You know, everyone's responsible if it's happening on your land. I'm going to say the same thing about the United States. Anywhere else. You know, in the U.S. we have a huge poverty problem. And you want to talk about economic exploitation, I'll tell you this. If you don't believe racism still exists in the United States, do you know why most of the African American population is poor? Does anybody want to know? Is it because African Americans are somehow lower than white people or light-skinned people?
What was your question again?
I'm asking you, African Americans they're the number one, or one of the number one groups in the United States who suffers from poverty and low education and crime. 70% of the prison population is black. Why?
Discrimination by the government.
Discrimination, yes. So it's not because they're black, right? It's because
They have different citizenship, right? Citizenship.
no, African Americans are Americans. They're born and raised there. But they're called African Americans because their ancestors were taken here as slaves. Now, taken in the United States as slaves. Now, I'll tell you one thing, one of the government policies in the United States that has yet to be overturned, and that seeps of racism. One of the ways that we get taxes for education is from your house taxes, okay? All right, so your schools, the quality of the school is dependent on the amount of money taken from your property. Now, if you live in a poor area, you get less money, right? So your schools are worse. So if your kids go to this school, are they going to get a better education or a worse one? If they get a worse education, are they going to go to college? So they're going to end up back in that same town. This was installed after the Civil Rights Movement to make sure that African Americans were kept where they belong, quote unquote. Okay?
They have a good system in place to control.
Keep them there. Obama, they said, solved all the problems. Obama didn't solve anything. He's like half Indonesian. He's not even African American. He's not even. I don't even know where he's from anywhere. I mean, he's a black-skinned person who went to Harvard. He's not even really black. So I'm being honest. He can't sue me or anything. It's fine. So, you know, I mean, freedom of speech, yay. You know, Obama didn't solve that problem. The African Americans are still there in the same conditions they were before. And in even Chicago, where I'm from, okay, we have the highest rate of crime in probably the world. Every other day, 2 African Americans, sometimes minors, are killed in gun battles in the south side of Chicago. Even the police won't go there. It's that bad. So, okay, did we skip anything? Okay, good. All right, no, here we go. Go back. Please, thank you. Okay, there is little concern for these atrocities and more focus on the benefits they produce. While there is a minority attempting to stop these horrible practices, many individuals living in scientifically advanced societies have little to complain about. Okay, next. Please. Okay. Misuses of science. So now we're going to go to my country. Yay. For instance, the United States has the highest scientific impact globally, okay, but spends 20% of its total budget on military expenses. More than 40% of the global defense budgets combined in the world. Of its research and development spending in science, it allocates 51% of its budget to the military alone, and only 24% on health and 0.2% on education. 0.2% on science and education. 24% on health. 51% of all scientific output from the United States goes towards its military.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Is that we're building weapons. Lots of them. And lots of technology. And we are using that for perpetual warfare and what we call defense. Okay? Which means billions of dollars to Israel. Now, anyways, historical sad fact, and I mentioned this earlier, 14 Muslim majority countries have been attacked by the United States since 1980. These events have displaced and killed millions of innocent people while simultaneously destabilizing the region and robbing it of its precious resources. So, when we have the use of science in this way, is it really a good thing to call yourself superior in a civilized fashion? Is it really something to be proud of? Is there a necessary causation between the truth of something and the fact that you can bomb a lot of countries? That's what I'm trying to ask. Does scientific and technological output mean anything when it comes to truth? Because, and I'll give you a more extreme example, Nazi Germany, everyone loves to hate on the Nazis, but they were powerful. They had really good health care, they had amazing weapons, and they had some of the best military the world has ever seen, and some of the best tactics, okay? They were basically, that's why they were considered the main rivals of the United States, all right, during that period of time, all right? The Germans were a very successful country during that time. They are successful now. But during the Third Reich, they were considered a superpower. Stalinist Russia was a superpower. They had amazing technology and health. And they had the most advanced weapons. So does that correlate with, should we believe in atheism now, even though they had all of these things? Should we believe in Nazism? Because what I'm trying to say is there's no direct cause between your power or what you have, materialistically speaking, and your ideas. Sometimes bad ideas can also produce materialistic wealth and power. And good ideas sometimes don't, because they're not being utilized. Okay. Blinded by science. Despite these other factors, what appears to be the case is that the majority of society follows, whether they are aware of it or not, the belief of scientism. Before we go on, I'd like to mention something here. Whether you think you don't or not, everyone in this room is affected by it. Okay, and the reason why is because Malaysia is very much a secular society, whether you also believe me or not. Okay? Scientism is a prolific belief within these societies. Now, let me give you a test. When you read the recent scientific discovery on the web, Do you believe it? Automatically? Yep. Why? Is it because science is absolutely true all the time? We don't really believe that. I mean, when I say that to you, you go, no, that can't be the case. But you trust it more than you think. Because it's actually been part of your indoctrination, actually in your secular education. This is very normal. Even if you may suspect, you will usually trust a scientist more than you'll trust a politician. Yeah, of course. Yeah, why? Even though the scientists may be getting paid by the corporations to release the studies that you're believing in. There was one time that that many scientists in the United States claimed that smoking was healthy for you. And they were paid off by the cigarette companies. Nobody said anything. You know, there are many scientists, let's see, who claim that using certain pesticides on your crops is okay. Monsanto. You don't think they were paying off scientists to back them up? Okay, does anybody watch American football? No? You should, it's a really nice sport. It's a lot of bashing. It's like rugby, but much more exciting, I think. Okay, there was a recent controversy in the United States. And this is, I don't know why people are talking, this is what we do. Americans just don't have anything to do with their lives. So there was this one team called the Patriots, and then you had the Colts. Okay, that's the name of the teams, okay? And the Patriots won. They destroyed the Colts. Like, points were just like over the top, okay? Well, what they found during that game was that when the Colts had the ball, their ball weighed differently than the Patriots. The Patriots' ball was lighter, deflated. You heard about this, right? So they said, oh, you must have been cheating. But then the Patriots said, no, we weren't cheating. Here are some scientists who said that the ball was deflated because of the temperature at the time and because it was raining outside. So these scientists conducted these experiments. You can even look them up on YouTube, okay, where they put water on the football and they put it in the refrigerator. And they came out and they said, look, see, the pressure dropped. See, so it could have been that, you know? Right? And then there are another group of scientists on the other end. They're saying, no, this is impossible. That much of a PSI drop is too much. So now there are two groups of scientists fighting. And somebody's trying to determine which one is getting paid. We don't know yet. I haven't conducted the experiment myself. I'm not a scientist, so I can't determine which one's telling the truth. But a lot of people are suspecting foul play. And some people are saying, no, the scientists are backing them up, so they must be okay. So even for something that small, if you give enough money, you know, you can get a scientist to say anything. Okay, so let's not assume that just because we have latest scientific discoveries that they're necessarily the case, because scientists are humans like everyone else. Anyways, so scientism, we already know about that. Can we continue, please? Sorry. The scientism debate. So, when did scientism actually start? Well, we have this lovely gentleman here by the name of Friedrich Hayek, who died in 1992. And I'm just going to read it to you and try to explain it along the way. Though scientism is believed to have been understood in practice in some form since the 17th century, the concept and the term used to describe it was crystallized by Friedrich Hayek. He stated the following: it need scarcely be emphasized that nothing we shall have to say is aimed against the methods of science in their proper sphere, or is intended to throw the slightest doubt on their value. But to preclude any misunderstanding on this point, we shall, wherever we are concerned, not with the general spirit of disinterested inquiry, but with slavish imitation of the method of language of science, speak of scientism or the scientistic prejudice. So he's trying to tell his readers right now, there's a difference between science and what I'm talking about right now. And he's the first one to coin the English term scientism. Now, the term actually existed in France about 50 years prior, called scientisme. Very similar, okay? They were having a problem with this early on. It said, it should be noted that in this sense in which we shall use these terms, they describe, of course, an attitude which is decidedly unscientific in the true sense of the word. It's quite all right. I have to cut the hand after that.
Really sorry.
Okay, so only one time. All right. So, decidedly unscientific in the true sense of the word, since it involves a mechanical and uncritical application of habits of thoughts to fields different from those in which they have been formed. In other words, what he's trying to say is that there were people back then, okay, and this is during the early 1900s, right, there were people back then who were using the natural sciences to explain what happens in sociology, what happens in history, what happens everywhere else. Okay? So, for instance, they were using evolutionary theory to describe how societies formed. Uh-oh. This is problematic. Why? Let's continue, please. So then we go to this individual named Karl Popper, Sir Karl Popper. Actually, I'm very fond of this philosopher. He died in 1994. He was a very charming British man. He was knighted by the Queen for his contributions to science. He was a philosopher of science and contemporary of Hayek, who would eventually become a main actor in historical debate. This debate, I will mention later, was between him and a man by the name of Thomas Kuhn. Okay, we will discuss Thomas Kuhn. He's a very important figure in this. He mostly agreed with Friedrich Hayek's definition, though he would admit to being a follower of scientism himself. But if by scientism we should mean the view that the methods of the social sciences are, to a very considerable extent, the same as those of the natural sciences, then I should be obliged to plead guilty to being an adherent of scientism. Indeed, I believe that the similarity between the social and the natural sciences can even be used for correcting wrong ideas about both of them. Okay, so he kind of adopted a very weak form of scientism. Now, something before we go on, Karl Popper, all right, he created a concept in philosophy that is well known in science today. All right, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's actually it's now outdated, but a lot of scientists still use the term. It's called falsifiability. Anybody familiar with this term, falsifiability? I'll explain it to you very briefly. Falsifiability means this. A theory or a concept in science is falsifiable, meaning that it can be tested, and if the test is in the negative, then we reject the theory. Okay? So every theory must be falsifiable to be considered scientific. Now, eventually, he would debate with Thomas Kuhn and lose in this respect. And this concept would be later rejected by philosophers of science. I will tell you how that happened. However, today, many people still use the term, including a lot of atheists. And I'll also explain why that's the case. Okay, can we continue? Bertrand Russell, also a fine gentleman. He was actually adopted at a young age by his grandmother. He was, I believe, he was an orphan. And he was an atheist his whole life. But his grandma was Christian. His grandmother was Christian. And she raised him in a very, very moral, strict fashion. He eventually went on to win, I believe he won the Nobel Peace Prize. I can't quite remember. But he went against nuclear weaponry. He wanted disbandment of all nuclear weapons. So he was very well known for that because he was one of the first proponents of that view. Okay, so he was very controversial for his time. Now, he also did something else which he did not intend to. First off, he created the foundation for contemporary programming in computers. And he also created the foundations for contemporary mathematics. Okay? He also created the foundation for contemporary scientism. None of this was intentional at all. Purely dogmatic scientists, as we know today, had a humble beginning with him. Many philosophers back during Bertrand Russell's time believed that numbers were synthetic statements. Synthetic statements, okay? So what is a synthetic statement? Well, the definition's in the next sentence. An analytical statement was that which was true by definition. Okay? What's a true statement by definition? Anybody know? Can you tell me? Anybody know what a tautology is? Okay. A bachelor is a single person. Right? Is that true? By definition?
Yes.
Okay, that's analytical statement. It doesn't need anything else to determine its truth value. All right? What's a synthetic statement? A synthetic statement was one which required verification external to the subject matter. Okay? The grass is green. That's a synthetic statement because I have to verify whether the grass is actually green. But of course, we know grass is green, but you know what I mean. But it's contingent, meaning it needs to be based on some form of experience. Okay? So that's the difference between the two. One is true by definition, one is true by experience. That's it. So there were philosophers back then that believed that numbers were true based on experience. Okay? So the way they proved it, Kant was the first one to kind of say this. Immanuel Kant, I don't mention him in this, but he was a German philosopher. He said, the reason that it's experiential is this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plus 2. 1, 2 equals 7. That was it. It's intuitive. Okay? So they argued that because each individual aspect of every mathematical formula could not be reduced to the sum of the whole or outside experiences, given the immensity of the calculations and questions, they had to be synthetic. In other words, each individual number was an actual thing, understood and practiced intuitively, floating somewhere in some ideal realm. So they actually believed numbers existed as objects, as real existing things out there in some unknown realm, wherever you want to call it. Bertrand Russell, who did not like this idea of numbers being like that, would find the solution to the problem of classical mathematics being claimed as synthetic by proving that it could be ultimately reduced to logical axioms. Math is reducible to logic. We know that today. Actually, it's a very common knowledge, especially if you're a computer programmer. You should know that. Okay? Math is basically just symbols. When we say 1, what we're indicating, okay, I have one finger. But 1 itself there's no such thing as 1. It's just, it has to be 1 something, you know. So the number 1 doesn't exist. It's just a symbol, just like a letter or a word doesn't exist. Like if I say human beings exist, but the word itself doesn't just like pop into existence and like start walking around or something. You know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm trying to say, right? Excuse me. For it was in fact analytic. In other words, he would prove that it was merely a symbolic relationship. In the same way, by doing this, by destroying these philosophers' argument, okay, that numbers were actual things, he also brought into question other views, such as supernatural ones, the idea of God. Okay? Because now that there was no realm where there were numbers, maybe other things too that they say might not also exist. Maybe those are also symbolic of something else. So he started a trend, which, can we go please, next? That was continued by this man, Ludwig Wittgenstein, which is probably the most, and I say this just out of humor, but he was probably the most eccentric and arrogant human being that you'll ever meet in your life. And I'll tell you why. He wrote about, I'd say 30 pages of notes when he read Bertrand Russell's work, Principia Mathematica, okay? And by the time he was done, he believed he had solved all the problems of philosophy. He literally believed that. And he gave up philosophy and became a grammar teacher as a result of that. He never liked arguments. If anybody disagreed with him, he would become very angry and call them stupid and walk away. If anybody disagreed with him at all, he would just consider them lower than him. And he tried to get his work published, so he sent it to Bertrand Russell. It was called the Tractatus. He sent it to Bertrand Russell, and Bertrand Russell didn't want to publish it. He thought it was very mixed. It made a lot of very direct, or say absolute statements, like a religious text, you know? And he said, I can't publish this. This is not really philosophy. So eventually, though, Wittgenstein did convince him, and he got his PhD from Cambridge, I believe it was Cambridge University, for his work. And what he basically resolved was not only Bertrand Russell, he further advanced Bertrand Russell to the point where he came up with this. The right method of philosophy would be this, to say nothing except what can be said. And before I go on, I want to say this as well. He believed that all statements were analytical. all of them, unless they can be empirically verified. Okay? This is the propositions of natural science, something that has nothing to do with philosophy. And then always, when someone else wishes to say something metaphysical, meaning non-observable, something outside of physics, metaphysics, meta means what? Beyond. Who said beyond? Who said beyond? You said beyond? Oh, you study Greek? Okay, that's good. Means beyond. Metaphysics means beyond physics. Okay, when somebody said something beyond physical observation, to demonstrate to him that he had given no meaning to certain signs in his propositions, meaning you didn't say, what he said is that if you tell me something like God exists, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, that doesn't have any meaning. There's no meaning there. You need to show me. Then it has meaning. Okay? In other words, any statement lacking any observable evidence based in science should be rendered as meaningless because statements can only have meaning if they actually point to something in reality. Okay? Statements are only analytic and without content otherwise. Please continue. We then get to A.J. Ayer, Willard Quine, continue, and Thomas Kuhn. Now the reason I put all these three, keep going, stay. Okay. I put all these three together is because this begins the end of this belief system. These three are the beginning of the end. A.J. Ayer, died in 1989, was another English philosopher. We'll switch slides in a second here, but not yet. He was in agreement with Ludwig Wittgenstein, okay? And he was part of the group called the Logical Positivist. Can we continue? Okay, boom, boom, next. There we go. All right. No, that's not it. Go back. No, that's too far. Go back one more time. What happened? That's it?
Yeah.
No, there should be another one. Go back. There's no text?
No.
Is it the right file? I could have sworn there was text. Okay. This is not good. All right.
Put it there.
Huh?
Can you put it to the right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do this the old school way. Sorry. I'm still young, don't worry. Oh, there we go. Okay, this is fun. Lovely. All right, can everyone see this board? Okay, A.J. Ayer had stated the following as Ludwig Wittgenstein. He said that any statement, okay, no statement could be verified unless by what? Empirical observation. He said no statement had any meaning unless it could be empirically verified. I'm going to put that statement on the board. Actually, can somebody write for me? I'm very bad at handwriting. Anybody would like to write for me? Please? Okay, thank you so much. I'll do the rest after that. So no statement has meaning. No statement has meaning, once again, unless it can be empirically verified, meaning observed in reality. Is that correct?
Statement has meaning what?
No statement has meaning unless it can be empirically verified. Okay, verified is fine. Yeah, it's fine. No, it's okay, I'll do it first. So, there we go. Okay, thank you so much, appreciate it. Unless it can be empirically verified, so we'll say verified here is empirically as well, okay? So he stated this opinion. Now, he was eventually, before his career ended and he passed away, he was often made fun of because he was the last person to still believe this statement. There was actually a large following of people who believed this. They were called the Logical Positivist, okay? And their group ended around the 60s and 70s, officially speaking, okay? And A.J. Ayer continued this, but the problem is that he was trying to convince everyone that there was not a problem with the statement. His whole career rested on that. Because somebody had pointed out, very convincingly, that this statement makes no sense. Why? Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this statement? Can anybody? Just think about it. Please.
We can't emphasize everything. So we should have like positivism and empiricism. So we can't emphasize everything.
Mm-hmm.
They are things so complex. It's not observed by our empiricist mind.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. However, that's not the refutation of this statement, though. But I will tell you that is part of the problem. That is part of the problem. We'll get into that more in detail later. There is one major issue with this statement. Anybody else would like to try?
This statement also can it be verified?
Nice. The very statement itself cannot be empirically verified. Khalas. Habis. Done. That's the end of scientism. Right there. Fun, right? But that's not the only end. In fact, a lot of philosophers tried to still defend this. A.J. Ayer was the last of them, but he failed miserably. There was no way that they could empirically verify the statement. And there was no way they could change the statement that would make it, remove it from its own principle. You can't do it. So it failed based on its own argument. So that was the end of logical positivism, and that was the end of really what we call scientism. Okay? So then came Willard Quine, who died in 2000, and Thomas Kuhn, died in 1996. These men were not English philosophers, they were Americans. Yeah, America. Okay? And they were part of the pragmatist tradition of American philosophy. The only thing I like about America is American philosophy and the pragmatist tradition. And they redefined science from the logical positivist point of view. They redefine it for the rest of generations. Okay? Yes?
Yeah, I want to come back to the statement.
Please.
The verification means the principle. If the principle gives the solution to the problems, it means being verified. Because it is a solution. So when it's a solution, we can use that solution to solve other problems. So the statement is verified by some principle when it gives the solution.
When it gives a solution. What you're talking about is is almost a form of pragmatism itself. The problem is that the statement itself cannot be verified in and of itself. The statement says very specifically, it has meaning unless it can be verified. Okay? So it's actually saying that it's a meaningless statement because I can't find anything in the real world that can verify the statement. Now, you can say it works, right? You can say that, but that doesn't mean it's true. And I know that sounds strange, and I'm going to tell you why that what I'm saying is correct. Just because something works doesn't necessitate that the principles behind it are correct. Okay? Let me give you an example. All right. How about this? I'll give you a moral example. Maybe this will be correct. I don't know if it'll be an appropriate analogy. I'm just thinking on the top of my head. All right. Unfortunately, brother, I have to punch you in the head. Okay, I'm going to have to hurt you because my ethical standard is that if I just feel like hitting somebody in the face, it's okay. You know, now it might work that I can get away with it or that I can punch you in the face, but it doesn't necessitate that what I'm doing is truthful or correct in any way, shape, or form. Is that correct? It's a little bit of a loaded analogy, but I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. Okay? All right. Is there anything true about the fact that when I sit on the chair, it doesn't break? Can anybody tell me, is there anything true about that? When you understand the word truth, right? Okay, if I sit on this chair and it doesn't break, is there anything true about it? Now, if I make a claim about the chair that if I sit on this chair, it will not break. That's a statement. It can be true, it can be verified when I go into the action of sitting on the chair. But the fact that the chair works itself, just by itself works, is not an indication of any truth. I have to make a claim about it. I have to have some sort of position about the chair in order for something true to be about the chair. But the chair itself is not any, there's nothing true about the chair, unless I say something about the chair. Am I getting my point across?
Yeah, I'll argue a little bit about this verification. For example, there is verse in the Quran that says that if you doubt in the Quran, which means you want to verify the Quran, then find a contradiction or bend a surah like it. If you couldn't, which means Quran is a true. So the Quran be verified by the Quranic challenge. So the statement was a verification for other statements. So once the other statement could not challenge the statement, this means the statement is true. So if we come back to the statement, this statement is a verification for other statement. When other statement prove wrong this statement, this statement is wrong,
Okay.
but this statement is right.
So let me ask you a question. If I reformat this argument and I say no statement but this one has meaning,
That's
maybe empirically verified. Now let me ask you why. Can you answer the question?
Yeah. In that context, it could be. It's not reliable source that we can only be, but there's some statement they're reliable and based on these principles.
Okay, now I'm asking you again. I'm going to ask you, if I say this statement, I would say no statement has meaning except for this one,
So we have to verify the statement.
unless it's verified. So, but I'm asking you, okay, so if we've excluded the statement itself from its own criteria, then what makes this statement justified?
And not only the statement, for example, if there's a statement,
Mm-hmm.
we need to verify the statement.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to look at the challenge of the statement. If we could prove the challenge of the statement wrong, then the statement is wrong. If we could not, the statement is right, but what we are challenging, that's wrong.
But what if I say to you that I did challenge? I did, because it's the statement itself cannot fulfill its own challenge.
The source is not reliable because it comes from the man.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But I mean, but what I'm trying to say is that because it doesn't meet its own criteria, it's what we can say informally that this is a hypocritical principle, or it's a self-refuting principle.
Paradoxical?
Paradoxical is different. Paradoxical is something that we can consider illogical, but it's not necessarily contradicting, because there might be some factor that we're not accounting for in this regard. However, because this is a statement, it falls within the very criteria that it's promoting. So because it cannot be verified, therefore it's false, or it's not meaningful. Yeah.
I consider this a suicidal statement.
Suicide, yes, that's a good one. Suicide is haram, by the way. Don't do that. Okay. All right. Okay, so Willard Quine came into the picture. And see, Willard Quine, he had the same objection to this, but he said more. And this is where it gets really fun. Because once we understand what Willard Quine and Thomas Kuhn said, we will understand what science really is and what it really means in today's age. Now, what Ayer and Wittgenstein and Russell were doing before this is that they were making truth reducible to the smallest parts. Okay? So they were making truth reducible to statements, to words, to numbers, to things like this. They were trying to build truth on the most basic principles of logic. All right? The problem is that truth cannot be reducible. And what Quine said was this. He said, you cannot reduce phenomenon to single things or single statements of fact, because we live in a web of knowledge. Okay? We are here, all right? Around us is a world full of context. Full of context. What do I mean by that? I'm going to give you an example to make this more clear. And this is going to be a fun example. Let's see how many things you can come up with, okay? I'm going to give you a statement. Just one statement. I have to fix the lock on my door before I go to work today. Simple. I have to call the locksmith, right? Because my lock is broken. Now, if I ask you why, you're probably going to tell me because I don't want somebody breaking into my house. I ask you why again. I don't want my things stolen. I ask you why again. You see what I'm saying? Keeps going, going. What do you mean by stolen? Why do you value these things? What is value? What is all this? So you can't reduce it. It keeps going and going and going and going because it's contextualized by the world that we live in. A lock. A lock has so many meanings. Believe it or not, we look at a lock on the door and we think, oh, it's just a lock on the door. But think about it. Why do we need locks? So people don't break into our house, right? But why do we care if people break into our house? You laugh, but think about it. Because we have a certain values about our own possessions. There are actually certain cultures in the world that don't care if you go into their house. Have you ever been to Nigeria? When I was going to UIA in Istak, I had Nigerian neighbors. And coming from the West, this was very strange for me because their kids would always come in my house and like take my things, And I was like, what's going on? So I would go complain to the parents, like, your children are stealing from me, And I'm sorry to say that. I know they're kids, so maybe they don't know any better. And then one day, I didn't get angry or anything, but I was inquiring as to why this kept happening because I started locking my door after that. And one of the older Nigerian brothers, he said to me, in our cultures in the village, everyone raises the children. So they come in and out of the houses and take what they want because everyone is their mother. So they think that I'm like his parent. And I'm like, well, I said, well, in my culture, we're related by blood. So, and nobody comes into my house unless with my permission. And he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I understand. I'll tell my children not to do it. So we settled the issue. But we had this issue for a few years because there would be times I'd park my bike outside and it would be broken because the kids were like riding it around or something, or they would use random objects from my house, so because they thought these were all theirs. They were their possessions. They didn't know any better because this is part of their culture. So for them, they don't lock the house in Nigeria because everyone is part of the community. It's all their house. And if somebody takes something from your house, it's normal because you can take something from their house because everyone shares the materials. It's very normal. And sometimes they said even you'll see women who are not even related to the children breastfeeding the kids and taking them around, and sometimes you think, oh, this must be their child. And it's like, no, she belongs to my neighbor, But it's perfectly normal in many places in Nigeria. It's perfectly normal. You can't even tell who belongs to who there. See, but in my cultural context, I need a lock on my door. Okay? Because if anybody from my culture comes into my house, they're probably going to get shot. All right? Without my permission, that is. Of course, I'm not going to shoot anybody. But you know what I mean, right? Because there's a different way that we live. So the concept of a lock may not be understood in Nigeria, because they don't have them. But here in in the United States or in Malaysia, it's perfectly normal. And we understand because we have certain values that surround the concept of the lock. So a lock, just a very simple lock on your door, has so much meaning. You can fill a novel with it. I'm not even kidding. I'm not kidding. Continue asking yourself questions about this. That was weird. Continue asking yourself questions about this. Why do I have a lock on my door? Why do I value possessions? Why do we have the concept of possessions? Continue to, and you keep asking more and more questions, right? It just keeps going on and on, even if it may seem absurd to you. So Willard Quine said that we live in a web of knowledge that contextualizes things, okay? And what we call scientific theories today is that web of knowledge. All right? The concept of a scientific theory, a lot of people I'm going to clear the room right now of this misconception, unless you need to understand. A theory does not mean that the scientists don't believe it's true. A theory simply means, it simply means a structure by which we can interpret data. That's it.
After what is that? After what is that?
After what?
After what is finished?
Yeah. So for instance, like if you say the theory of evolution, and we're going to talk about evolution later, so let's not get too, some people in here might be like, why is he talking about that? Not good, but the theory of evolution is considered by scientists to be fact. They don't call it a theory because they think it's not true. They call it a theory because the word theory means something entirely different from untrue, or not certain. It means this is our tafsir. Okay? Theory means basically tafsir, all right, to the scientific community. A hypothesis is a little different. All right, that's something that we're attempting to ascertain whether this can be a theory, whether something can be certain. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that a theory is absolute fact. We're going to get into that in a second as well. Okay? Because Thomas Kuhn will reject that notion. But it does mean that the theory is interpreting the data correctly, at least according to contemporary opinion. All right? So, let's move on to Thomas Kuhn. He is actually my favorite philosopher of all time, so I have a lot to say about him. Okay? He actually attended the same university as Quine, which is why he actually got where he got most of his ideas from. And he went on to suggest another concept. He called Quine's holistic, patterns or holistic structure a certain word, and we use this word in everyday English today. It's called paradigm. You ever heard the word paradigm? That was invented by Thomas Kuhn. Okay? The word paradigm was invented by Thomas Kuhn. And what Kuhn said was that we have these holistic structures of knowledge in which we use to interpret things. And sometimes this web, right? Okay, so let's say this is a theory, okay? Let's call this theory number 1, all right? So theory number 1 has been interpreting data for the past 100 years. Scientists have been working with this theory, and they've been making a lot of good predictions with it, okay? So let's say this theory was the Ptolemaic system before. Okay, let's say that this theory was the Earth was the center of the universe and everything rotated around it, okay? So we have the sun and everything, all the other planets rotating around, okay? So this was a very successful theory, actually, during its time. Very successful. And what I mean by that is it actually predicted quite a lot. So a lot of people say, well, it's outdated, but in actuality, they did a lot of scientific discovery. They discovered a lot of things in astronomy because of this theory, okay? Now what happened later on was that scientists started getting very confused, though, about certain things like the eclipses and things like this. They couldn't figure out why, if everything was going around the world, okay, in a very systematic fashion, why was it that sometimes it was very erratic, meaning that it was very chaotic? So they started coming up with different things. Okay, so if this is the case, maybe the planets don't go in one system. Maybe they go like this too, Maybe they go like this, and maybe some go like this, and some go like this. And so they kept going more and more complex. And then eventually somebody said, this is just too much. Maybe it's more simple than that, So they started encountering something we call anomalies. Thomas Kuhn calls anomalies. And what it means is that changes or things that would not be usual, okay, so unusual behavior, all right? And so this theory kept getting more and more and more complex. So one day, Copernicus decided, well, maybe I can solve the problem. But instead of putting the Earth at the center, let me put something else at the center. So he puts the sun at the center, okay? And all of this here became much more simple. Much more simple. And he solved a lot of the problems with the eclipses and stuff. I'm not getting into too much detail as to what those are because that will take a whole discussion that I'm not worth. You can actually read up on it. Okay, the transference of theories, okay? Now what occurred eventually was that the scientific community did not want to adopt this yet. Okay, why? Several reasons. One, some of them had jobs and they wanted to keep their jobs. And if they were wrong all this time about this theory, they would lose their jobs. So they said, no, we're going to reject this. This is nonsense. Okay? Some of them were astrologers. Does anybody know what astrology is? Okay, so they would do what with astrology? They would determine your destiny based on the movement of the stars and the planets. So they used the Ptolemaic system in this way. So their astrologers were very famous back then. Their jobs were on the line. So they said, we're not changing this theory. Okay, we lose our jobs otherwise. And also, politicians used astrology. So he said, no, 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 no. If you're correct about this theory, then that means that the reason people are following me is wrong. So can't do that either. Sorry. Okay, so you see the problems here? Society was very much opposed to it. Okay, for what? Usually pragmatic reasons, practical reasons, material wealth, political power, etc., etc. Okay, maybe pride, right? Now Thomas Kuhn says is that there's a dogmatism in science. So this dogma occurs between scientists, so they don't want to accept anything yet. So usually what happens is that these scientists usually die off, the ones with all the prestige and the power, and then a new group of scientists come in, some younger ones, and they go, you know what? We don't have much to lose, so let's try this out. Let's try it. Let's see how it works. Okay? And eventually it becomes popular because it's easier to fix the mathematical problems or dealing with the eclipses and such and such. So what eventually happens, Copernicus' system was adopted. And Thomas Kuhn calls this, what? A paradigm shift. Have you heard the paradigm shift? This is what happens. In his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, okay, every few generations, a paradigm shift occurs because a certain theory will be very successful at doing what it's supposed to do. It makes good predictions, it works, okay, but then it starts to run into problems. The more data, the more information that gets collected into the theory, the more the theory becomes unstable. Oh, there's something that's wrong, you know? It's becoming a little bit unbalanced. So then what the scientists will do is, okay, well, let's see, maybe we can change it a little bit, so let's add this, let's add that. And then the more they keep doing it and accommodating for all the new information, it gets more unstable. They find more anomalies, and it gets heavier, and heavier, and heavier. And then one day, somebody goes, okay, this is getting ridiculous. All right, so we need to change something. Something is wrong with the theory. Okay? And so they change it to something else that is able to solve those problems. And then you have a paradigm shift. So, is science absolute fact? No. But there are ounces of fact within science. There is such thing as scientific fact. There is. Okay? But when it comes to understanding those facts, what we have to understand is that science is not about what we see necessarily, it's how we interpret what we see. And it's based on theory selection. The reason, for instance, that evolutionary theory exists is to account for the diverse nature of species on the planet. Okay? Now here's where I'm going to get controversial. I'm going to be very open with you. Okay? So please do not get up and try to kill me. All right? I am a fervent believer in evolutionary biology. All right? Now this does not mean that I believe men came from apes. Okay? That's far from it. All right? This does not mean that I believe that Adam came from some distant ancestor or something. Okay, I don't believe that. All right, this is called what some people call macroevolution. Okay, this is a concept of the origin of, or the sort of the hierarchical tree of certain species. Okay, however, biology itself, the study of biology. If any of you are biology majors in here, you're actually probably learning evolution every day, even if they don't talk about it in your biological textbooks. Okay, and the reason why is this, is because evolution is about two things: adaptation and mutation. That's it. For instance, I'll give you a very simple example of evolution right now. You get sick. Who's been sick in the past week or two? Anybody here? You don't have to tell me, but I mean, who's been sick last year? Everyone's been sick last year? At least once? Okay. Your body, your white blood cells, they became immune eventually to that illness, right? They evolved. That's it. They didn't become a cat or anything, but you know, like they didn't become another animal, but they adapted.
It's a guided process.
Yeah, but now we'll get into natural selection later. I agree with you that it's a guided process. But what I mean to say is that evolution is just that. So for instance, if I go into a hot climate and I'm under the sun for a while, okay, and I become tan, right, what happens? My skin color changes, right?
Pigmentation.
Pigmentation, right? Different, right? But why does it change color?
Pigmentation.
Okay, but I mean, there's your skin does it for a purpose. It
Cover the
to cut.
activity,
Okay, right,
yes.
right. So it protects you. You've just evolved.
Sort of all.
That's it. That's really all it is. That's evolution in a nutshell. I mean, when you start talking about species changing, then you get at the genetic level. You start saying, okay, things are these two species, they can't mate anymore. So they're two different species. Okay, they can't, their genetic information is too different. Okay? So this concept, the evolution that I'm sort of talking to you about, is actually, in some ways, well, first off, we'll get into the Quran in a moment, maybe in a later session. But do I have still some time? Thank you. But what I want to say is that the Quran does not speak against or for evolution. Okay? That's it. It doesn't. It does say something very interesting. It says that we all came from water. So it all says that we came from common material, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because actually we share 98% genetic material with apes. Does it mean that we're related? No, but we share the same materials. Actually, we also share a lot of material with dolphins and other things, but it's a different story. If you looked at a baby fetus before it forms, you notice it has a tail?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Do you notice what happens when a frog is formed? Also has a tail. A lot of mammals, they have tails before, even when they're grown full, they don't have tails. They have tails when they're babies. They're little fetus. Why? Maybe it's because we're made up of the same genetic material. That's it. It's not much. There's not much. I mean, there's nothing controversial about that at all. So when I speak about evolution, I'm not talking about that we are cousins with apes or that I'm not talking about that aspect. I'm talking about the basic foundation of modern biology. That's all I'm talking about. Okay? So when we go against evolutionary theory, we really need to understand what it's trying to say. A lot of people even say, like I said, that humans come from apes. In actuality, the scientists who claim our relation with apes say that we're cousins. But we're not, like we don't come from them. They're like a different tree over here. We came from something else. That's what they say. So we have no relation beyond that. Like, you know, we didn't just one day pop up as an ape and go, okay, here we are. No, that didn't happen. It's just that because apes are so similar to us, they assume that we must have had a similar ancestor. That's all they're saying. But it's not proven. It's just an assumption on their part. But most of evolutionary theory has nothing to do with that. People assume that it does, but it doesn't.
Is it theory or is it a hypothesis?
Evolution is a theory. It's an interpretive lens, how we study biology. So without evolutionary theory, we would not have modern antibiotics. We would have not modern, vaccines. Modern medicine is based on most of evolutionary theory, actually. So except for surgery and things like that. But you know what I'm talking about. Modern medicine is based a lot on evolutionary theory. The way our bodies adapt to things, to diseases, et cetera, et cetera. There's a recent, they found the cure for AIDS, by the way. Anyway, I'm not kidding when I say this. But they found a cure for AIDS by doing a stem cell transplant. Stem cell transplant. Taking out the bone marrow. Replacing your cells with somebody else's. And since the AIDS virus had adapted to your cells, it can't see the other person's cells. So it dies. So they tried this on one man recently. If you look it up, there's an HIV patient. They tried a stem cell transplant on him. Now he's cured. He has no AIDS virus in him at all. None. It died. It starved itself to death, basically. They've also started to use modified AIDS or HIV viruses. They modify them to attack cancer cells instead of white blood cells. They attack cancer cells. So they're actually injecting people with HIV now to cure them of cancer. Isn't that crazy?
So, when did you came to know about this?
I read Scientific America, Nature, and things like this. You can't find anything? Okay, check HIV patient stem cell transplant. And check HIV and cancer. But yes, there are recent reports of that. I think it occurred 2 years ago. If not, I can verify the source for you later for anybody who's skeptical. Okay? So, moving on. Since we got into the evolution discussion there, Thomas Kuhn developed this concept of paradigms. He changed the nature of science forever after that. Science was no longer absolute fact. It was based on human interpretation, constructing theories to understand the data around us.
But isn't he criticized by the majority, the large
No, he's not, actually.
philosophy community?
He was criticized to be a relativist for quite some time. However, he himself denies being a relativist. He says that I'm not a relativist so much as I'm a subjectivist. And actually, the one who was criticized the most was Karl Popper. I forgot to mention that Karl Popper and him had a debate. They only had one major debate where Karl Popper was trying to use falsifiability against Thomas Kuhn's concept of paradigm shifts. And I already mentioned falsifiability here once, right? Okay, this is how Thomas Kuhn won the debate. He said, if you're right about falsifiability, that means that evolution or some aspects of evolutionary theory cannot be true because they can't be falsified. We can't test them. So Popper had to eventually limit his conception of falsifiability, which eventually then he just discarded entirely. And then he actually believed in some sort of metaphysical principles. If you read his later books, he actually admits to having not supernatural beliefs, but philosophically metaphysical positions that before he would have never adopted. So, excuse me. Okay, I think we have finished this slide. So can we go on, please? Okay, so if scientism was defeated, is it being resurrected? Here's a group of individuals. Can you keep going? All of them, please. All of them. Oh yes, my favorite group of people. One more time. Boom. Okay. On the right, should I move this? I'm sorry. Okay, on the right here, the bottom four are considered to be what we call the new atheists. Okay, they're the new atheist leaders, quote unquote, or intellectuals as you would call them. Two of them have recently passed away, Christopher Hitchens and Victor Stenger. Christopher Hitchens was the author of the popular book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Victor Stenger was a popularizer of new atheism. He had many books. One of them was the God hypothesis, or God, the failed hypothesis. The other one was the new atheism, taking a stand for reason and science. Richard Dawkins is very famous for writing the God delusion. Anybody's familiar with that? Sam Harris is also very famous for writing The End of Faith. And what they all have in common are all the beliefs that I mentioned earlier, and also a very intense Islamophobia. We can get into that later as well, probably tomorrow, regarding the intentions of some of these individuals. Many of them confess that the reason that they started to be so open about their atheism is because of September 11th. Okay? And what they considered to be the rise of fundamentalism across the world and terrorism, and all based on religion. All right? But the most important people in this list are Antony Flew and George Smith. Because these two individuals are responsible for resurrecting scientism. All right? Antony Flew died in 2010. He eventually actually converted to deism. He became a believer in some form of God prior to passing away. And he based his belief on the fact that there was scientific evidence for God's existence. Okay? Prior to that, he was probably the most well-known atheist. Okay, up until 1970s and 80s. He was the one, Antony Flew was the one who came up with the concept of weak and strong atheism. He was the first one to divide them. He was the one who changed the definition. He was the one who said that an atheist is one who lacks a belief in God, and they are justified in lacking belief in God until evidence is given to them to change their opinions. Okay, so he was the first to do this. Now, George Smith comes into the picture a little later. George Smith attended one of Antony Flue's lectures. Okay? And he is not as well known as a philosopher, but his ideas are the reason for the four below. He took Antony Flue's opinions about lack of belief a little farther, and he took his views of evidence also a little farther. And before I go on, I need to mention one more thing. Antony Flew came up with one principle for evidence. He said that the only type of evidence that could possibly occur, at least in his mind, would be from the natural world. And this was his principle, is that he said the reason why is because human beings can only understand their own habitat, where they live, okay, and where they're from. And we have limited resources, right? We can only understand and explain things based on our natural environment, right? If we have never, been to China, for instance, I can't tell you how it is to live in China. I don't know anything about China, right? That's a very simple example. But more importantly, I would say, since we've never seen the supernatural realm, we can't explain anything about it because we don't understand it. We don't know what it is. Okay? So, I think it was called the Stratonicean principle. And anyway, so George Smith took it a little bit farther. He said, Dr. Flew, I understand where you're coming from, but there is absolutely no way that a person who believes in God can offer you evidence. Cannot. There is no way that anyone who believes in God or supernatural can offer you any evidence to fulfill your requirements.
Who said that?
George Smith. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. What he said was this. He said that to offer God as an explanation for something is to offer no explanation at all. Because the only way we understand explanation is based on the context in which we live. So he said, when you say that God explains this, it doesn't mean anything. Does that remind you of something that we heard earlier? Right? Logical positivism. Okay? He brought back this principle, but in a different way. Instead of saying that statements are meaningless unless they're verified, he said explanations are meaningless unless they can be empirically verified. Now, where's the difference? There's actually a significant difference, because now the statement of verification is saved. Because the statement's not an explanation, it's just a statement. Right? So now, you can't say that it's self-refuting. Right? So he changed basically the verification principle from all statements, any statement is meaningless, no statement has meaning unless it can be empirically verified. He changed that to no explanation. No explanation can have meaning unless it can be empirically verified. Clever, right? Oh, he made a lot of people angry. It's very bad. He started to annoy some people after that. And since then, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Victor Sanger, and I'm sorry that the display is not working. I believe that there is a slide in there that shows all the information that I'm talking to you about, so I'll give it to you later so you can verify yourself what I'm saying here. I'm just kidding, I'm playing with you. So Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Victor Stanger basically say that religion is irrational because there's no evidence. Okay? There's no evidence, there's no scientific evidence. And at the same time, they say God is a scientific hypothesis, right? But then they tell you that unless something can be scientifically proven or justified in a way, we have no reason to listen, basically, to understand or try to understand what you're saying. Okay? Now, here's the problem. They know that a theist, or somebody who believes in God, okay, believes that God is outside the bounds of time and space. physical properties, right? They know this.
Sorry, can you say it?
They know that God, the concept of God to the monotheistic religions, or most religions in general, except for the pagan ones perhaps, is that God is outside of time, he's outside of the bounds of limited space and physical properties. So, what are they asking for then? They say to us, the atheists will say to us, you need to prove God based on science. But they also say that science can only be explained within the realm of the natural. But our concept of God is beyond that. So how can we do anything? It's a lose-lose situation. It's a lose-lose situation. Until now, and this is where now I'm going to get a little bit more confident. I have developed an argument against George Smith. And nobody that I have met has been able to refute it yet. And I'm very happy to say that.
You don't look happy. Can you smile when you say it?
Okay, very nice. All right. And you're probably wondering, how does this post-grad nobody sitting or standing on stage here talking about these things? Is there down there? Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you. Know how to defeat these people after several years of their popularity. And one of the things I have to say is that it's called an unhealthy obsession with their ideas. But I think I have created a defeater. And I have yet to find one of the ulama or any other Islamic philosophers, or such as, I don't want to name names, so I won't name names, but I'm sure you know of some da'is who argue against atheism online, etc. I'm sure you know who they are. We're not going to mention who they are, okay? I know them personally. But they have not answered to this. So I spent 3 years desperately trying to figure out. I went to every philosophy book you could think of. Okay, I went and I studied from every different type of philosopher. I studied analytical philosophy, I studied existentialism, I studied continental philosophy as whole, I studied Heidegger to no degree, and Heidegger is almost impossible to understand. I studied everything I could get my hands on. And finally, I gave up. I gave up around the second, and then I came up with the argument. And so I'm going to present it to you now. Premise 1, if meaning and explanation can only be derived from the natural world, then all conceptions of reality are derived from the natural world. Okay, very simple concept. All right. If meaning and explanation can only be derived from the natural world, then all conceptions of reality are derived from the natural world. So anything that we think is real is from the natural world. That's all it's saying. Okay, I'm just being very formal. Premise 2, if all conceptions of reality are derived from the natural world, then they must be a coherence of meaningful experiences. What does that mean? I'll explain it to you real quick. Anyone here believe in unicorns? Nobody believes in unicorns? Oh, shucks. Fairies?
You want us to believe?
No, not yet. I'm not that good. Okay, no. Flying spaghetti monsters? Flying spaghetti monsters. That's the common example used by atheists these days. Flying spaghetti monsters. Anybody believe that there's a teapot orbiting Mars? No? UFOs? Okay. Let me tell you something. A unicorn, I'm going to use a unicorn here, okay? All right. Unicorn is a meaningful concept. Why is it meaningful? Okay, unicorns, let's say unicorns don't exist, right? Let's say they don't. We don't have evidence for that, okay? But I can imagine a unicorn. It's just a horse with a horn on its head. It's a combination of two natural things, right? So it's actually a very meaningful concept.
Try a flying horse?
Flying horse, okay. I can imagine a horse with wings. Why? Because I know what wings are and I know what a horse is. Right? How about a flying spaghetti monster? Spaghetti flying around, I don't know. But I understand what spaghetti is and I know what flying means. Okay, so I understand these things. Fairies, small little people with, wings. Okay, so I know what these things are. Okay, so if all conceptions of reality are derived from the natural world, then there must be a coherence of meaningful experiences. Now let me give you a non-meaningful experience. A non-meaningful experience. A married bachelor.
What?
Married bachelor. Does that mean anything?
Not yet.
Can you be single and married at the same time?
Yeah, can.
No, I'm not talking about polygamy. Okay? No. Okay, I'm talking about the two definitions, right? They're contradictory, correct? Okay, what about a square circle? No, it doesn't work. Right? Now, those two things themselves, they have meaning, right? But I can't combine them. Okay? All right, so let's look at premise 3. People believe that there is a meaningful transcendent reality, God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that shares no properties with the natural world. Very easy. People believe in God. That's number 3. Number 4. If premise 1 and 2 are true, that's what P1 and 2 mean, then premise 3 is a conception of reality derived from the natural world, which content is a coherence of meaningful experiences. Okay? For me to understand what I'm saying, for me to even believe in that concept, I have to, basically what it's saying based on the other premises, is that it must be a combination of meaningful experiences from the natural world, right? For me to even be able to conceive of it. Correct?
Too heavy, man.
Too heavy? Let me give you, okay. I tried to explain earlier.
Is it talking about cause and effect?
This is a trick. This is not, I'm going to get to it in a second here. So basically, in order for me, based on these premises, my belief in God must come from here. It must be natural. It must be from the world. A lot of atheists will agree with you. They say God is man-made. Right? They say that, right? Okay. Number 5. What does number 5 say? No number of meaningful experiences can direct one to consider the possibility of something meaningful beyond said experiences. This is where this is where the argument gets effective. And this is what I'm going to say this is how I'm going to defend this. I'm going to give you a simple analogy. Okay? You're a fish in a fish tank. Okay? And you're swimming around your little borders, okay, in the water. Do you know that you're in a living room? Do you have any conception of living room? Do you have any clue that you're in somebody's house? Do you have any clue that you're living in the state of Selangor? Do you have any clue, as a little fish in the tank, that you're living in this little blue planet, in this small, and in this, actually this huge galaxy, made up of billions of other galaxies in this universe? Do you have any conception of that at all, as a fish in the fish tank? Let me give you another example. My sheikh makes this example. I love this one. He said he loves the ants in his house. I like them too, by the way. They're nice. So these ants, they always march in this linear pattern around the corner of the room. Okay? And they always do it because there's sugar at the bottom, because it's in the kitchen area. So they always grab these little bits of sugar that his wife drops whenever she's making something, right? And they just go back. He always wonders, he always finds it fascinating. He says, they're wasting so much energy. If they just would look up, they go in the cupboard, there's all the sugar right there, right? But they said, but they don't understand, they can't. Their perception is limited, right? So they have no conception whatsoever of the possibility even of that being the case. Okay? There's no conception because their surroundings define or contextualize the way in which they interpret the world, right? So basically the argument is this. There are limited resources, therefore we can only make limited explanations because of those resources that we have. But number 6 says this, therefore P3 is not a conception derived from the natural world. No number of meaningful experiences from this world can direct one at all to conceive of the possibility of something beyond it. Something that is beyond merciful, that is beyond powerful, that has something beyond our limited conception of intelligence. Okay? We cannot make an analogy whatsoever. So when we conceive of something, we believe in something, and we call this a doxastic attitude, meaning belief attitude. In philosophy, doxastic means like a belief attitude. Okay, so the only way you can actually believe something is if you actually have some sort of understanding. Okay? So it has to be it has to mean something. It has to have some sort of conception. Okay? So if the natural world is the only thing that can provide that, then how is it that we're thinking of something beyond it?
Brainwashing.
Brainwashing? But who started the brainwashing?
Parents.
How did they learn about it?
In a society.
How did the community society learn about it?
Goes back to the.
So the first person, how did they figure it out?
evolution.
How did evolution do it?
I just say.
But there's a limited number of resources. How did evolution, an unguided process apparently, determine that somebody believed in something beyond itself?
So it's fitra?
Fitra, bingo. What? He said fitra. It's good. Yes, it's basically the fitra. But more importantly, the argument is not just saying fitra God. No, it's not saying that. It's not saying that at all. Okay, it's saying that the natural world itself is limited. It is impossible. It is literally inconceivable. It is contradictory to be able to conceive of something beyond its own, beyond limitations. If you have a certain amount of ink or a certain amount of in this marker, right? There's a point in time I'm going to run out. But I would never conceive that I can make limitless amounts of this on the wall, okay? Unless you're a 4-year-old, which then they'll just like all over the place, you know? Okay? But there's no possibility for me to conceive of that. I understand limitation, I understand limitlessness. But what is limitlessness? I live in a limited world. How do I understand what that means? How do I even conceive of the possibility of that existing? That there is something beyond it? It doesn't make any sense. I look out into the universe, I see a couple of stars. There is no rationale behind me conceiving that there's something beyond those stars. There's absolutely no rational justification whatsoever.
They define it as a infinity.
Infinity. But even if I said, an atheist may respond and say, that's hyperbole. Maybe you're just believing because it's hyperbole. But hyperbole means exaggerated language. Right? When I say, oh, this thing is, I'm super rich, I'm infinitely rich, it's an exaggeration, right? It means that I have unlimited, but even I know that I have limited. So I can't really say that. But when I talk about God, I mean it. How is that possible? Is it just language? But if it's just language, language is used for explanation. Language has meaning. If I just said blah, 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 to you right now, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying. I don't even know what I'm saying. There's no content. There's no structure to it. But if I tell you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond merciful, beyond gracious, do you understand what I'm saying?
Infinity?
To infinity? Do you understand to some degree what I'm saying? Do you understand?
It's unmeasurable.
It's unmeasurable.
Unimaginable.
But you can't fully grasp it. In Islam, we understand this, that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are relative to us to a degree. That means that we can't fully grasp them. However, they will say that you can understand. You can. There is a level of conception where you understand that there is something beyond that is limitless. That what we do is nothing compared to what he does. Right? We understand that, and it's very normal. We don't have some sort of contradiction in our head. It doesn't bother us. It's something that's very simple to understand. Does that make sense? So what I'm asking with the atheist is, how is it possible? If you tell me the natural world is all that can offer me meaning and explanation, how is it possible that I see beyond it? Can't. So, man, the reason this is also an effective argument too, and I'm bringing this up, and the reason I brought up unicorns before this, and flying spaghetti monsters and things like this, is because atheists will typically say that your belief in God is just like believing in unicorns. You have no evidence. But then I will respond and say, unicorns and God are completely different things. A unicorn is a horse with a horn in its head. God has no horn, he's no horse. He's nothing in this world. So do not tell me that he's the same as a unicorn.
Using wrong analogy.
Wrong analogy. It's an improper analogy. It's what we call actually a category error. Category.
Basically, you're saying unicorn is human imagination of mixing up things.
It's a composite.
Whereas God
Mhm.
is unimaginable,
Mhm.
so you can't derive anything. So you can compare it.
It's impossible.
What is human imagination?
Mhm.
And our limits.
One is beyond imagination, but yet we understand it.
Is that what you're saying?
Essentially. But let me give you another thing. Okay, so if the unicorn is a horn and a horse, right? Is it empirically verifiable? Meaning that I've seen a horn, right? And I can see a horse. So I would expect that if unicorns exist, I would find a horse with a horn on its head, right? So I can say with certainty that they don't.
So Richard Dawkins in one of the debate
Mhm.
talked about Burak. How do you use this argument against
Burak?
the flying horse?
Oh, the flying horse. This is where we get into specifics of religion. Okay, this is where we get into specifics. Okay, in regards to Islam, there are certain things that we don't question. And the reason we don't question them is not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to close our minds. Okay, it's because He's asking us to trust something else. He's not asking us to trust that okay, I can prove Islam to you, or I can prove my power to you because I have a flying horse here. Okay, that's actually irrelevant to the story, by the way. You know, the whole concept of the flying horse flying up to heaven with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's completely irrelevant to the story. It happened, okay. But Allah is not saying anything beyond the fact that it's some sort of fact, all right, according to His power. We don't believe in Islam because of that. We believe in Islam because of the Quran. We believe in Islam because of our fitrah attached to that as well. The actual evidence for Islam is the Quran. And we're going to get into that a little later, actually, in regards to how the Quran has been misused in this day and age and how it should be used against non-believers in regards to da'wah. Okay? Remember the ayah of the Quran that says, strive against the disbelievers with all your might using this Quran? Remember? That ayah by itself proves that the only evidence we need to strive against the kuffar is the Quran. Now, in regards to God's existence, the only reason I came up with this argument was to go against people who I consider to be stubborn. Because in my personal view, there is no such thing as an atheist. In my personal opinion, everyone has a fitrah. And if they deny the fitrah, they're denying themselves. They're just sort of, what they're doing is they're pushing it down. They're just sort of, what we call it, what is it called? A cognitive dissonance in psychology.
What do you call it?
Cognitive dissonance. It's a very big term, but what it basically means is that I know something is true, but I'm going to put it to the side because it makes me uncomfortable.
Cognitive what?
Dissonance. So it's dissonance. So this is not to be insulting to atheists, but this is just what I basically believe regarding, because I believe everyone has a fitrah, that's it. I'm not saying it to insult anyone. I'm just saying if you don't believe in God, then you're holding it back. That's what I'm trying to say. So when I constructed this argument, I had that in mind. So my purpose for the argument was not to prove God exists, because I already believe that, and I believe everyone already believes that. My purpose for shooting this argument was to destroy their argument, so they had no choice but to go to the other side. That's it. So all I said was I use your reasoning. You tell me that the natural world is all I can use for meaning and explanation. If that's the case, then I shouldn't believe in God. Because I believe in God, that means you're wrong. That's it. So in the next, oh wow, we're beyond time. Wow, okay. In the next session, inshallah, I hope to discuss the conception of the Quran as being a scientific miracle and why that's wrong. And we should not be doing that based on our understanding of science and based on what the Quran really is. Okay? I will also discuss maybe an additional argument for God's existence. And after that, we will have a question and answer session. And then we can prepare for tomorrow. Okay? So in the meantime, I guess we'll take a break.